Hey warriors, if they play dirty, outsmart them mentally, because this world doesn't reward the cleanest heart, it rewards the sharpest mind. Weak thinkers constantly hide behind the comfort of morality to avoid the brutal realities of human nature. But Niccolo Machiavelli never taught people how to be evil. He taught awareness, survival, and how to stand upright in a room where everyone else is already lying. Look around your life for a moment at work or in your social circles to notice a terrifying paradox. Professional manipulators never look aggressive. They look calm, reasonable, and smile while rearranging the board against you. True power doesn't come from shouting or emotional outbursts. It comes from positioning, from ultimate patience, and from knowing how people think when they believe no one is watching them closely. If someone plays dirty with you, it's not because they're stronger than you. It's because they understand a psychological code you were never taught. They understand human behavior without the comfort of morality. They know how expectations work as traps, how your reactions expose weakness, and how silence creates unbearable pressure. And most importantly, they know that good people hesitate, wait, hope things improve, and believe intentions matter more than outcomes. But dirty players don't think like that. They don't attack your strength, they attack your expectations, waiting for you to assume decency so they can make their final move. This video is not about becoming cruel or deceitful. It's about gaining a razor-sharp vision of the environment you are already in. Because refusing to see the game doesn't remove you from it, it only makes you an easy piece to be crushed on someone else's board. In the next 20 minutes, we will dissect 5 core dark psychological principles so you can stop reacting, stop explaining, and stop bleeding your mental energy to people who don't deserve access to your emotions. If you stay until the end, you won't feel louder. You'll feel calmer, sharper, and harder to move. Drop this affirmation in the comments right now. I see the game to activate this path to mental mastery. Imagine walking through a dense, foggy forest where predators do not hunt with claws, but with invisible psychological rules designed to suffocate their targets. Have you ever wondered why your honest efforts, absolute dedication, and genuine kindness so often return to you as betrayal, exploitation, or cold abandonment from those you trusted completely? This is not a random coincidence or a cruel twist of fate. It is a precise mathematical result when an unguarded heart collides with the ruthless laws of human nature. Dirty players do not look for powerful targets to confront directly. They hunt for predictable behavioral patterns, predictable paths of kindness, and weak psychological reflexes masked as a desire for harmony. We are constantly lulled into a false sense of security by fairy tales of inherent fairness, turning ourselves into voluntary prey that exposes every vulnerability while believing we are accumulating moral credit. Machiavelli understood this perfectly centuries ago. In an environment filled with volatility and deceit, virtue without strategic awareness is nothing more than a fast track to destruction. This exploration of power is not for fragile souls looking for emotional comfort. It is the ultimate survival blueprint for warriors who intend to reclaim absolute sovereignty over their destiny, their energy, and their psychological space against all forms of toxic invasion. Rule 1. Why dirty players love good people. The first brutal truth Machiavelli forces us to accept is that the individuals targeted most for manipulation are not the weak, the stupid, or the incapable. They are the good, the consistent, and the transparent. When you choose to behave the same way in every situation, with every person, expecting the same moral standard in return, you are completely unaware that your consistency is drawing a perfect strategic map for any predator looking to exploit you. Manipulators do not hunt for raw power to crush you. They hunt for predictable patterns, quietly observing who hesitates before saying no, who rushes to excuse the mistakes of others, and who experiences overwhelming guilt when asserting personal boundaries. These are absolutely not flaws in character, but in the eyes of a professional predator. They are perfect tracking signals inviting exploitation and the theft of your labor and trust. A good person operates on the naive assumption that everyone shares a universal value system, that the rules are mutual, and that fairness is an inherent property of the world. This assumption is the fatal opening that hands the other side total control over timing, tone, and outcome. Machiavelli understood deeply that morality without strategic awareness becomes predictability, and in a hostile or highly competitive environment, predictability is never a virtue, it is dangerous exposure. When a dirty player knows exactly how much disrespect you will tolerate before pushing back, and how many chances you will give before walking away, they don't need force. They calculate a slow escalation. Eroding your rights piece by piece, they begin with small boundary violations, an unexcused late arrival, a malicious joke disguised as constructive feedback, or a subtle shift of responsibility, and they stand perfectly still to observe your reaction. If you choose to remain polite, patient, and hopeful that they will realize their mistake on their own, the manipulator learns that your boundaries are made of paper, and they will advance to occupy larger spaces in your life. Good people often deceive themselves into believing that unconditional restraint earns respect, but reality proves the exact opposite. Restraint without leverage is nothing more than an open invitation for increased pressure. Dirty players never fear your moral philosophies. The only thing that terrifies them is uncertainty. People who do not lay their cards face up too early and who refuse to rush to restore balance when provoked. Therefore, advertising your virtue on the surface does not increase your value. It removes your strategic flexibility, letting the enemy know exactly where to push to slide you off your center. The solution is not to become evil, but to practice strategic ambiguity. You do not need to alter your internal goodness, but you must strictly control what you reveal to the external world. You owe absolutely no consistency to those who have not earned your trust, and you owe zero clarity to those who are quietly collecting information to weaponize against you. Only when you completely shed the illusion of inherent fairness can you reclaim absolute sovereignty over the chessboard of your life. Rule 2. The art of controlled weakness. Machiavelli's second principle completely flips conventional thinking about strength. Displaying raw force only activates defense and resistance from the surrounding environment, much like high heat draws cold pressure. When your strength is completely obvious, those around you immediately adjust their tactics, build defensive walls, form alliances, and hide their true intentions to deal with you effectively. Conversely, when true power is carefully hidden beneath a calculated mask of harmlessness, opponents fall into a state of complacency, drop their guard entirely, and automatically expose their worst angles without realizing it. This is the essence of the art of controlled weakness, a highly proactive, strategic maneuver, rather than the submissive surrender of an inferior player. Dirty players possess an innate instinct to scan for potential threats. They do not fear loud, aggressive individuals as much as they fear those who possess silent capability that cannot be mapped. When you appear with an overly perfect persona, radiating absolute confidence and knowledge, you inadvertently force those around you to erect an information barrier. They speak less, protect themselves more, and guard their edges carefully. But when you deliberately allow small gaps to be seen, a few controlled vulnerabilities in your awareness or reach, the psychological atmosphere shifts dramatically in your favor. Controlled weakness is not pretending to be incompetent or useless. It is strategically choosing when not to correct someone, when not to challenge a flawed perspective, and when not to reveal that you have seen through their plot. This ultimate restraint creates a false sense of security for the opponent, making them believe they hold the upper hand, which triggers impatience, leading to poor decisions, over-explaining, and the exposure of core priorities they would normally guard. Machiavelli concluded that human impatience is always a direct product of an artificial advantage people manufacture in their own minds. When someone believes you lack options, or that you are too naive to recognize their game, they stop managing their behavior carefully. They speak freely, accelerate boundary violations, and escalate actions without securing backup defenses. The biggest mistake capable people make is trying to prove their intelligence and competence too early in every conversation simply to satisfy a temporary ego. By doing so, they manually shut down the invaluable flow of information heading toward them. Because the moment the enemy realizes you are tracking every move, they stop revealing their hand. Maintaining controlled weakness keeps the data channel wide open. When you allow their false assumptions about you to continue, they feel perfectly safe repeating their tactics, and that is precisely when their behavioral patterns emerge. Their dark intent becomes visible, and their timing is mapped out. True strength does not lie in a constant display of muscle, but in the selective and unexpected manifestation of power. You decide when to assert, when to withdraw into shadows, and when to appear uncertain to disrupt every calculation of the opponent. This constant variation ensures no manipulator can build an accurate predictive model of you, and without a fixed model to cling to, they are forced into hesitation and error. Your ego might crave recognition, and your pride might want immediate clarity, but revealing too many strategic cards too early collapses your hidden advantage entirely. The goal of a high-level mind game is not to win minor, isolated early hands, but to quietly accumulate decisive leverage for the final phase, where the predator who thought they were hunting suddenly realizes they are the prey trapped in a net woven long ago. Rule 3. Why explaining yourself makes you lose. Machiavelli issued a stark warning against the human habit of unnecessary honesty and over-explanation, not because truth itself brings disaster, but because the act of explaining is a voluntary transfer of supreme control into the hands of the opponent. The exact moment you begin to justify your actions, motives, or decisions, you officially surrender the sovereign right of interpretation and reality shaping to someone else. What you believe is an effort to create transparency and understanding is actually turning into a perfect fulcrum for the other side to apply psychological leverage right back onto you. An explanation always carries an implicit invitation. It grants the listener the right to judge and evaluate whether your reasoning is valid, sufficient, or acceptable, transforming you from an active decision maker into a defendant begging for approval from a self-appointed judge. Dirty players recognize this psychological vulnerability instantly. They never argue about the objective outcome, they focus entirely on dissecting the world of your reasons. Because verbal arguments are the easiest things to bend and distort. Every explanation you utter constructs a logical framework, and every framework contains blind spots and gaps that allow manipulative arrows to pierce through, weaponizing your own words against you. A manipulator never listens with the intent to understand or empathize. They listen exclusively to extract data, waiting quietly for the smallest contradiction, high-emotion vocabulary, or structural gaps to reframe the entire narrative in their favor. Conversely, strategic silence operates as a seamless steel wall, leaving no surface for the opponent to grip, attack, or distort, because something left unsaid can never be cropped, misquoted, or structurally inverted. Machiavelli understood deeply that withholding commentary is the only way to preserve strategic ambiguity, and this ambiguity is the shield protecting you from aggressive assaults, keeping the enemy from discovering your actual boundaries to make risky moves. Furthermore, explaining yourself inadvertently exposes your entire internal prioritization system. when you frantically justify a specific issue. You send an unspoken message letting the enemy know exactly what can hurt you, what you fear being misunderstood about, and where their pressure is working best. Dirty players will note these tracking signals to design highly accurate assault campaigns in the future, turning your honesty into a map for their next invasion. A dangerous psychological shift occurs when you sink deep into explanation. You begin investing massive energy into controlling how others perceive you. And this investment transforms you into a purely reactive entity, constantly running to adjust your tone, defend intent, and protect the ego. The conversation completely stops being about objective facts. It is twisted into a battle for narrative control, where you are permanently stuck on the defensive. True authority never has a habit of explaining. It makes decisions, announces results, and lets the world adjust around it rather than stopping to justify its logic. When you act decisively without any redundant commentary, you force the opponent to adjust their behavior to adapt to the new reality. Conversely, when you over-communicate, you send a signal that your boundaries are negotiable and your decisions can be altered if they generate enough pressure. Dirty players often trigger the explanation trap deliberately by raising questions that imply doubt, feigning confusion, or expressing mild disapproval to force you into a defensive posture, pouring out more information than necessary. Once you walk into this trap, stopping feels awkward, and the psychological cage closes smoothly, turning your silence into a weapon that forces the opponent to reflect on themselves. In the void of your explanations, the manipulator is forced to fill the gap with their own assumptions, and those assumptions, born of panic, will expose their true nature, fears, and intent, rather than yours. This does not mean becoming a deceitful entity or avoiding reality. It demands a supreme clarity to understand that not every action requires a screenplay, not every decision needs a defense, and not every move benefits from transparency with the world around you. Rule 4. Dirty players never attack directly, they position the board. One of Machiavelli's most profound observations on the art of influence is that those who truly understand the game of power never prioritize direct confrontations or open attacks. Explicit assaults always come with massive risks. They generate intense resistance from the target, increase the visibility of the attacker, and easily expose them to public condemnation. Instead, truly dangerous dirty players utilize the strategy of positioning, a silent method of restructuring the circumstances around you without creating any surface friction, causing you to fall into the trap while leaving no one to blame. They do not push you into conflicts brutally. They elegantly arrange environmental variables so that any response you choose, whether resistance or silence, automatically works against your own interests. Instead of accusing you directly, they choose to plant ambiguous suggestions. Instead of openly opposing your plan, they alter the frame of reference. And instead of challenging your capability, they quietly set boundary conditions to minimize your choices. You are not forced to act. You are invisibly guided to make decisions according to the exact script they authored in advance. And once you react under psychological frustration, the entire surrounding context has been perfectly designed to make you appear hot-tempered, out of control, selfish, or completely irrational to onlookers. This positioning strategy relies entirely on manipulating context rather than using raw force. Because human perception is always shaped by what is visible in the immediate environment, the timing of the event, and visual comparisons, psychological predators will patiently wait until crucial third parties are present, or they will choose the exact moments when you are exhausted, busy, or under heavy pressure to inject manipulative variables quietly, then step back to enjoy the show. As tension escalates on schedule, they will maintain a perfectly composed, polite, and forgiving persona, using this absolute contrast as leverage to completely destroy your credibility and image without uttering a single direct insult. Machiavelli understood that a person's reputation is rarely destroyed by baseless accusations. It is thoroughly eroded through systematic, repeated subtle implications. When one person always appears dignified, and still while you are constantly forced to react and explain, those around you automatically draw unfavorable conclusions without any overt direction from the manipulator. This is why all your loud efforts to clarify or resist usually backfire. Frantic defensive behavior inadvertently confirms the opponent's frame that there is indeed something hidden needing cover. The more energy and emotion you invest in repairing public perception, the more attention you draw to the contextual trap the opponent painstakingly set for you. This positioning technique also operates through a malicious tactic called role assignment, where you are locked into a negative archetype before you even speak. The image of a constant complainer, an uncooperative colleague, or an impatient egotist. Once that label is firmly attached to the perception of the environment, your subsequent kind or rational actions will be warped through that lens of prejudice, leaving you completely helpless in demanding fairness. Dirty players do not care about objective facts. The only things they manage and manipulate are symbolic labels. And if you do not possess the capacity to read the entire stage before reacting, you will constantly mistake systematic manipulation for random coincidences of fate. You will exhaust yourself fighting surface mass manifestations, while remaining completely blind to the underlying structure below the very thing that dictated the outcome of the game long before the first lines of dialogue were spoken. The only way to break this vicious positioning strategy is not by increasing aggression or using brute force, but by practicing absolute stillness and observing from afar. When you deliberately slow down your reaction pace, you disrupt the opponent's entire timing design. When you refuse to perform the negative role they scripted for you, the entire manipulative playbook immediately loses its efficacy. When you offer minimalist responses or maintain a cold silence, the emotional contrast they want to exploit vanishes completely, and the positioning strategy collapses because it finds no reactive energy from you to amplify. Manipulators feed on the predictability of the target. They need you to bristle, frantically excuse yourself, or express anger at the right time to complete their play. When you fail to execute those behaviors on schedule, control over the narrative flow slips from their hands instantly, and the entire environment they worked so hard to build turns back to bite its creator, causing onlookers to notice the anomalies and deceit in the manipulator's behavior. Rule 5. The Trap of Fairness and the Rise of Accuracy. Machiavelli exposed a brutal truth. The concept of fairness offers nothing more than moral and emotional comfort. It has never been an effective tool for securing balanced rights in the real world. We naturally tend to cling to this naive belief, hoping that surrounding entities will automatically adjust their behavior according to an objective standard, and that time will correct injustices. But this entire belief system collapses the exact moment you confront a party that has actively thrown the rulebook away, while you still hold the textbook of morality tightly to your chest. Fairness only exists and operates effectively within an environment where all participating parties share an absolute, binding commitment regarding mutual interests and penalties. Outside that boundary, worshipping unconditional fairness means turning yourself into a moving target to be slaughtered. Dirty players possess a special capacity to recognize souls imprisoned within the trap of fairness. They take full advantage of your moral commitment to execute boundary-crossing leaps, seizing actual advantages while knowing for certain that you will limit yourself within old standards to avoid damaging your image, while you are busy considering which behavior is morally correct. The opponent has already completed calculating which action yields maximum efficacy for their invasion. This severe asymmetry in thinking dictates your crushing defeat before any interaction truly begins. The greatest hazard of idolizing fairness does not lie in your kindness, but in the rigidity of your strategy. When you insist on applying an equal standard to an inherently distorted and asymmetrical environment, you manually strip away your own capacity to adapt and defend. Manipulators always rely on this weakness. They know you will hesitate deeply before deciding to escalate conflict. They know you fear being labeled as excessive, and they know you dread being viewed as unjust far more than suffering an actual loss of practical rights. Machiavelli pointed out a historical truth. Justice without enforcement capabilities and coercive penalties is nothing more than a decorative symbol. It might soothe the egos of the weak, but it has never created any real deterrence against power predators. Dirty players are never moved by symbolic values or appeals to conscience. The only thing capable of reshaping their behavior is the actual cost they must pay if they dare violate your boundaries. When a wrongful act carries no worthy price tag, it automatically repeats with higher frequency. And when imbalance brings the opponent immense comfort, they will continue to deepen that gap to bury you. The obsession with appearing fair completely paralyzes your decision-making speed. While you are busy analyzing what reaction is measured and appropriate, the opponent has already acted based on what yields optimal efficiency to seize the board. This delay is not neutral. It is a voluntary transfer of total strategic momentum into the enemy's hands. Because dirty players understand the paramount importance of tempo, they execute decisive moves while you are still busy discussing moral categories. There is a highly toxic psychological reward tied to this trap. It allows losers to feel morally superior while they lose their entire kingdom and control over their lives to someone else. This is why so many intellectuals and good people remain permanently trapped in personal tragedies. They disastrously confuse temporary moral satisfaction with an actual strategic victory in the world of survival. Machiavelli warns us to escape this dangerous illusion. Because power never cares about the good intentions inside your mind, it only recognizes and submits to actual results manifested on the ground. Instead of thinking within the rut of fairness, you must upgrade your mind to a higher state called accuracy, the capacity to reflect and react based on objective reality exactly as it is, not as you wish it would be. Accuracy demands that you adjust your behavior based on the opponent's actual actions, not the abstract ideals in your head. When someone decides to step across your boundary, accuracy requires you to respond proportionally and decisively without any apology or second-guessing. It does not search for a distributed balance. It reestablishes the power leverage by introducing practical penalties that force the opponent to halt immediately. Dirty players often use a highly sophisticated reverse psychological trick. They will be the first to loudly accuse you of being unfair or excessive the moment they feel their control threatened, or when you begin to erect fortified defensive walls. This accusation is a strategic strike designed to trigger your innate guilt, forcing you to automatically step back and contract your defensive boundaries to return to the framework of restraint they can easily manipulate. Machiavelli understood this tactic perfectly. The moment you stand still to argue that you are completely fair, you have officially abandoned your entire strategic advantage and voluntarily entered the lion's den. Accuracy does not equal senseless cruelty or blind vengeance. It represents supreme precision in choosing reactions capable of neutralizing structural imbalances without creating emotional melodramas. It helps you understand exactly when restraint serves your long-term interests and when that restraint is actually feeding the opponent's invasion plans, helping you transform the rules of the game into sharp tools rather than anchor chains imprisoning your life. After everything we have dissected together, the loop of power always brings us back to the core initial truth. If they play dirty, outsmart them mentally, because this world doesn't reward the cleanest heart, it rewards the sharpest mind. Every principle, every strategy, from understanding why manipulators love good people, the art of hiding within controlled weakness, supreme silence before the explanation trap, to seeing through context positioning and upgrading from the naivety of fairness to the razor sharpness of accuracy, all converge on a single objective: transforming you into an unmanipulable entity. True power never needs to shout, never needs to frantically prove itself, and absolutely never stoops to explain itself to seek a false sense of security from the environment. It quietly adjusts the boundary elements of context, keeps itself in a state of strategic ambiguity, and leaves predators to expose their entire vulnerability under the light of impatience. The moment you cease reacting to the emotional commands of the opponent, the moment you no longer fear the gaps of silence and stop rendering your intentions to beg for understanding, a grand transfer of power occurs within your living space. Those around you will begin to walk with extreme caution and hesitation when facing you, not because you uttered threats or displayed aggression, but because they realize they have completely lost the capacity to read and predict your moves. And in the world of manipulators, a human being who cannot be read is a mathematical problem far too expensive and dangerous for them to risk investing their schemes in. You have no duty to win minor, trivial arguments. You do not need to correct every misunderstanding of the world. Your sole duty is to position yourself firmly on the high ground of the power chessboard. Once the world realizes you are someone who never chases outcomes, never begs for clarity from deceivers, and always commands your psychological tempo under extreme pressure, they will automatically stop playing dirty with you, not because they experienced a moral awakening, but because their own self-preservation and self-interest force them to do so. Remember this truth deeply. You never become powerful by adding empty noise. You become truly invincible by stripping away your predictability completely before the face of the enemy.